My name is Raghavan Iyengar, and it gives me immense pleasure and excitement to welcome you all to the second episode of the Intellectual Indian Show with Raghavan Iyengar. Here, we dive into the latest developments in worldwide politics. Kindly forgive me for taking a longer break than was expected of me, since I had actually ended up injuring myself, due to which I had to take an extended break. So, the topic of today's episode, within today's episode, basically, I would like to discuss the growing trends in Canadian polity since Mark Carney's elevation as Prime Minister of Canada. I have been noticing certain trends in the Canadian political fold, and that is ever since Donald Trump, the President of the United States, has assumed office, and and Trudeau has offered up his resignation. The Liberal Party of Canada, they have sort of rebounded in the polls. I would like to begin the episode by first of all giving some background for Mark Carney. Who is Mark Carney? What is his ideology? What are his positions and his platform? Mark Carney, as you know, he is the current Prime Minister of Canada. He recently took over from Justin Trudeau, and as such he's the leader of the Liberal Party of Canada after an internal election of the party. Notably, Carney is someone who is not a career politician like Pierre Poilievre. Pierre Poilievre is Carney's opponent, and he is the Conservative Party, which is the main opposition party in Canada. That party's prime ministerial candidate for the next general elections, and he has been serving as the leader of opposition in the House of Commons since 2022. Mark Carney, he has a very diverse experience as such. He's someone who had served as the as the governor of the Bank of Canada and also governor of the Bank of England. He was sworn in as Canada's 24th Prime Minister on March the 14th, 2025, and his leadership has brought forth various different changes. His leadership is such that it has marked almost a significant change and a significant shift in Canadian politics. He is someone who is well renowned for his economic expertise and also his experience when it comes to global finance, due to which he is often reputed as a strategic leader and also a technocrat. Uh, then again, his ability to navigate complex economic issues is also why his message, his platform is resonating with Canadians from different walks of lives, as they believe he's someone who will be able to effectively and efficiently deal with the threat of tariffs. Uh, One must bear in mind that already an additional 25% of tariffs have already been imposed on Canadian exports by the United States. Other than that, there are different challenges faced by the Canadian state as well. There's always the threat of a trade war by the United States, and Donald Trump's incessant and constant jokes that he will make Canada the 51st state. So there are various challenges that Carney will have to face, and I'll discuss how he is sort of countering those challenges. Uh, he's perhaps best known for guiding Canada through the 2008 financial crisis. That is exactly why he has a better rapport with the Canadian public in comparison to different career politicians like Pierre Poilievre, his main opponent, and also people who have tremendous political baggage like Justin Trudeau or Chrystia Freeland. Uh, Point to be noted, Mark Carney is someone who has received a strong and a resounding mandate from the Liberal Party fold to rejuvenate their fortunes and also resuscitate them as a party. In the recently concluded Liberal Party leadership elections, Carney had received more than 86% of the votes against notable primary opponents such as Chrystia Freeland, who had served as the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance under Justin Trudeau. The prime ministerial candidate and the leader of political parties in Canada is selected through ranked choice voting or single transferable vote. This is how Canadian primary elections are conducted for political parties. Carney's platform is such that it tends to emphasize and focus on primarily economic stability, clean energy policies, and also a strategic shift and a strategic and nuanced approach. so as to counter and also balance US trade tariffs, which have already been imposed by the Trump administration. Carney is someone who has advocated for shifting the carbon tax burden from consumers to corporations, while also promoting incentives for emission reduction. Trudeau was someone who was radical and aggressive in his manner of implementation with regards to the carbon tax burden. That was one of the primary reasons as to why he was unpopular with the Canadian public over a period of time. Because he expected certain sacrifices by the Canadian public. However, at the same time, while he advocated for environmental conservation and protection, his government, his administration was not exercising uh, environmental protection as such. They were almost hypocritical in a way, due to which it led to a lack of responsibility, a lack of accountability, and distrust and lack of faith towards the Canadian government. Carney, on the other hand, is someone who's trying to position himself as a leader solely focused on protecting Canadian interests and industries. I'll give some basic information as to how the Canadian political scene and scenario has been for the past couple of years. The last general election was held in 2021, and ever since that elections, for most of the past few years, that is, it had looked almost inevitable that Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party would lose the next Canadian election. The economy, it had been stagnant, GDP per capita had been falling, and Trudeau himself was and is still awfully unpopular. When he had announced his resignation on January the 6th in a press conference, the Liberals, they were more than 25 points behind the Conservatives. That is 45 points to 20 points. However, in the 2 months since, the Liberal Party's fortunes have absolutely reversed. And the latest polling tends to suggest that the Liberals could not only deny a parliamentary majority to the Conservatives, but they could also form a government by themselves. Canada's Liberals, they have had a tough few years, if I'm being honest. Their poll numbers had been abysmal, and also by the end of last year, as I had already stated, they were almost 25 points behind the Conservatives. They were not even performing, a lot better than their former coalition partners, the New Democratic Party led by Jagmeet Singh. Trudeau's approval ratings, they were even worse. In December, only 22% of Canadians said they approved of him, and more than 70% of Canadians said they did not approve of him. So that is a negative net approval rating of almost minus 50. That is, awful. That is terrible. However, in the past couple of weeks, the polling seems to have shifted dramatically. Almost immediately after Trudeau resigned, the Liberals, they started rebounding in the polls in a way, and now they even lead the Conservatives as we speak. Recent polls have even suggested that the Liberals could even win outright, that is, obtain a parliamentary majority, which would have been almost unthinkable even a few months ago. With right now, the data seems to suggest that a 39% vote share will be obtained by the Liberals, which would result in winning close to 178 seats, and 37% vote share for the Conservatives, or close to 129 seats being projected right now as we speak. This momentum, it has made the betting market even more pessimistic for the Conservatives. Polymarket, for instance, you might remember Polymarket, during the US presidential election, it had rose to prominence as a forum wherein, people could place their bets, and that was something that was used by various news organizations so as to kind of enforce their own agenda. Polymarket, it seems to suggest that there's a 60% chance for Carney to continue as Prime Minister in comparison to only 39% for Poilievre to become the Prime Minister. And there's a 54% chance that the Liberals end up winning the most seats in comparison to 45% for Conservatives. Uh, After hearing this data, you might feel that it's more or less even. However, you must understand just how fast the tides have changed. The Conservatives, they had a 93% chance, 93% of winning the most seats. That is just the day after Trudeau resigned. So Between January the 7th and today, the Conservatives have fallen from a 93% chance to now just 45% chance. That is unprecedented. Uh, Also on poly market, there's a 47% chance being predicted that the Liberals end up obtaining parliamentary majority. Nobody would have thought that something of this magnitude and scale would have happened so quickly. If you don't trust me while I cite all this information and all these statistics, you can look at them yourself. I pick up the information that I use primarily from reliable poll aggregators, pollsters, research institutions, and news organizations like 338 Canada, the Angus Reid Institute, Nanos Research, Ipsos, and CBC. You can look at them yourselves. You should not take my word for granted. For only then can we become much more informed and much more aware citizens. Now, I would like to conduct an analysis of what is exactly happening. The main reason as to why Trudeau had been wildly unpopular towards the end of his term with an almost minus 50 net approval rating. And other than that, the Liberals had also been losing various bypolls. That was because the public, they perceived the Liberal administration to be quite frankly a failure due to a multiplicity of reasons, such as the carbon tax, Trudeau's handling of the economy, his environmental policy, his almost hypocritical environmental policy, rising house prices, the impending housing market collapse that was being predicted by some experts, and so on. There were a multiplicity and a multitude of reasons as to why the Trudeau administration was looked upon as an incompetent and a kakistocratic administration, if you may. Carney, on the other hand, has been popular in comparison to Trudeau, quite popular, I would say, as he has been able to successfully distance himself from the failures of the Trudeau administration, something which his primary opponents and rival leadership candidates they had found very difficult. And Carney was also able to successfully criticize Trudeau's economic failures and track record, which then again proved to be quite difficult for his primary opponents. Why is this monumental shift happening? I believe that is because the Canadians they have started shifting from focusing on topics like immigration or housing, which were topics where Poiliev he particularly thrived. Those were his talking points. Canadians they have now started focusing more on who will be better suited to negotiate with Donald Trump. A recent poll by Ipsos it showed that 39% of Canadians preferred Carney in this category, whereas only 26% preferred Poilievre. Carney is also seen as more competent by close to 14 points. Carney is also leading Poilievre on other issues such as economic management, addressing the housing crisis, and so on. Donald Trump, in an interview conducted 3 or 4 days ago, also indicated that it would be much easier to negotiate and deal with Mark Carney in comparison to Poilievre. Poilievre, on the other hand, is trying to build up an image of himself as someone who is willing to stand up against American trade aggression. This is something that has been sort of unpopular with Canadian conservatives since they really, really like Trump, and also because the moderates and the populists they tend to closely associate Poilievre with Trump, leading to a leading to a lack of faith and also distrust on part of them towards Poilievre. Ironically, there had been an insider joke in Canadian political circles, and that was whoever would be chosen to replace Trudeau would end up as the shortest serving Canadian Prime Minister. Ironic, right? Uh, the tides have completely shifted. So, I just wanted to mention that for a moment also. Moving on, I believe Carney's popularity it sort of indicates a sort of fall from grace for Trudeau, who had been hailed as a Canadian Obama by global progressives and liberals. He had been a force to be reckoned with at both international and national levels, since he had been able to successfully form a government 3 times, albeit twice in a minority government. I also believe that the constant pressure that had been imposed by the conservatives, and the calls for a carbon tax election has actually ended up working against them. That was a historical blunder in a way. Uh, there are certain points which one must take into consideration while making certain forecast projections or also reaching upon an analysis, and that is a higher vote share does not always indicate a victory, as Canada also follows a first past the post system like India. I would like to give an example just for the sake of simplicity and for the sake of understanding. Trudeau has contested three federal elections as the prime ministerial candidate of the Liberals, and that is 2015, 2019, 2021. In the federal elections for the House of Commons of 2019 and 2021, wherein Trudeau stood up against Andrew Scheer and Erin O'Toole, the Liberals they actually ended up losing the popular vote to the Conservatives, and they also could not obtain a parliamentary majority, due to which they had to lead a minority government in alliance with the NDP. So basically, what inference we can derive from this information is that just because a party might end up getting more votes than their closest competitor, or else might end up winning the popular vote, that does not mean that they will be able to form a government. And that is how it works in India as well. 2015 as such was the only election where Trudeau he ended up becoming the prime minister while winning the popular vote and getting more votes than the conservatives, when he successfully unseated Stephen Harper, whom you might remember served as the 22nd prime minister of Canada from I believe 2006 to 2015. Coming to recent data, recent news and speculation, it is being speculated that Carney he might call for snap polls for the 28th of April. As you might remember, the current term of the assembly will expire in October, and that means that the general election is not to be held no later than October, with 343 seats up for grabs within the House of Commons. As we move towards the conclusion of the second episode of the Intellectual Indian Show with Raghavan Iyengar, I would like to present a summary basically. I believe in summary, the Conservative Party they are desperately trying to paint an image of Carney who, if not directly, was at least indirectly responsible for the current state of affairs and the failures of the Trudeau administration in his previous erstwhile capacity as an economic advisor to the Canadian government. However, unfortunately, they are losing the narrative and rhetoric game, which calls for improvement and a sense of self introspection on part of the conservatives if they actually want to win this general election. I would like to end this episode by quoting Ronald Reagan, the 40th President of the United States and one of my personal heroes, who said, and I quote, "The nine most terrifying words in the English language are: I am from the government and I am here to help." With this, we come to the conclusion of the second episode of the Intellectual Indian Show with Raghavan Iyengar. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope to see you all again for the next episode. Thank you.